So during phase 5 of the design thinking process, we take our ideas and turn them into prototypes. Those prototypes we can then actually take to real customers and learn from them what works and what doesn't. That's the last phase of the design thinking process, so-called test. Now the goal is here to learn very quickly and very cheaply what works and actually what doesn't work. What often happens in projects is that you have a very long concept phase, followed by a design phase, and at some point later on in the process it goes into development. And finally, the product launches. The problem is that A, it takes a very long time, and B, there's no guarantee that we're actually going to be successful with our product. In design thinking, we're trying to learn as early as possible what's working and what isn't. So we're building our first prototypes, testing them with real users, getting real feedback, and then adapting or iterating the product. And that way we can iterate our way forward, improving the product continuously. So we learn, we adapt, and move our product forward until we can create real value as quickly as possible. That way, we can reduce the risk of actually building the wrong product. At the end, we have happy customers. So how does prototyping actually work? First of all, obviously it makes sense to have the right materials available. So for example, you could use Play-Doh to create objects very quickly, a whole bunch of cardboards or papers to build rapid prototyping, as well as different materials, whatever's available, like Lego or play mice to create little figures and scenarios. Another example of a low-fidelity prototype is, for example, a paper prototype of a digital app. So instead of actually rushing straight to development and spending lots of resources on expensive programmers, we start by creating simple paper prototypes, simple wireframes, to understand actually what works best. So in this case, for example, it doesn't take very long to draw an interface, but I can play an actual computer and show this to a potential customer and give him a task. So then the customer can actually say, okay, I'd like to now click on here or click on this. And he clicks on it and I play the computer, very slow computer, and I show the next screen. And with these small interactions, I can very, very quickly find out what's working and what isn't. And if something isn't working, I just remove the strip, write a new one, stick it on, and I'm ready to go for the next user test. Another form, less tangible form of prototyping is, for example, role play. This is very useful if you want to create services, because that's where you get people together in a room and they actually play through the entire service. And that way you can adapt and iterate on the spot to learn if something is working or isn't. You could also create a press release of the future. That means that you imagine that your product already exists and is extremely successful. And then you write a press release based on the actual success of the product. Or you could write a fictional letter to the CEO. And that way you can actually incorporate not just the value for the user, but also business value in it. So prototypes don't necessarily have to be tangible products that you can take in your hands. They could also be just role plays or press releases, as we've just heard. Basically, as long as you create something where you can get feedback on it, that already qualifies as a prototype. So once you've created your first low-fidelity prototypes and you've gathered the first round of feedback, you can then move on to the next stage and create, for example, digital prototypes. Especially if you're creating software products, it then makes sense to turn those paper prototypes into clickable digital dummies, which means you can either just photograph them and link up the screens to create a more realistic experience, or you can use different softwares to actually create interfaces which then link up, which sort of pretend that you're actually clicking a real product. Other ways could be videos or landing pages as well. So what happens next? You've created your prototype, you're ready to go, and you're about to test it with the first user. Now, the problem is that you've actually fallen in love with your idea. That's not good, because you're not open to criticism and feedback. You actually want to sell your idea, and that's super dangerous, because basically you're holding back from any kind of improvements. The goal is to actually actively seek criticism so that in the next iteration round, your product becomes even more better. So rule number 1, don't fall in love with your prototype. The thing is that often your very first ideas aren't necessarily the best ideas. So you actually need to be prepared and have the courage to actually chuck those ideas to make room for even better ideas. So really have the courage to kill your darlings. After all, prototyping is always about iterating your way forward to create not just useful and usable products, but actually products that delight the user. So what happens next? First of all, you come together as a team and you create a list of really risky assumptions that actually need to be true for your product or for your idea to be successful. Out of the list of all the assumptions, you pick the riskiest of all of them, and you decide what the easiest way is to test that assumption, and that actually defines what type of prototype you're going to build. And last but not least, you define as a team the test scenario, how you're going to test that prototype. And then you're ready to test and to learn and to improve.